You take it. Your mic is on. Oh. Can everybody hear me? Okay, perfect. Thanks, Ms. Hirsi for coming tonight. Wonderful talk. We're hoping to get a dialogue going here. We know that everybody in this audience has different views on the speech that you just heard. That's exactly as it should be at an open university committed to free speech. Thank you for coming, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
And now it's time for question and answers. So try to keep your questions and comments to a minute, minute and a half, and we'll just proceed kind of from one microphone to the other microphone. We'll start right here.
Hello. I think what you were talking about near the end was that, like, how you brought up the example of those two young girls in Texas, and how if they were white and, you know, were named Lindsay and Sarah or whatever, that the situation would have received a lot more publicity. And the reason for that is, like, the media doesn't cover it as much, and people are afraid to talk about it so much because they're afraid of offending people. And, you know, for some reason or whatever, in today's society, people are more afraid of offending, shall I say, minorities or non-Christians. And obviously that's not right. And I mean, obviously based on your reasoning, it's pretty clear that Islam preaches violence against women and non-Muslims, and it needs some major reforms. So what do you think, and what do you think it will take, and when do you think it will happen, that Americans will be able to freely speak about the need for reform to happen within Islam, so that situations like what happened in Fort Hood earlier this year, where political correctness got lots of people killed, and it will continue to happen? What do you think it will take that people can come out in the open and talk about this issue so we can deal with it peacefully before it really escalates and before a lot more people die as a result?
I think we ought to do a number of things, and the first step is to emancipate ourselves from the idea and from the inhibition that we can't criticize all the ideas and all the religions and all the beliefs in the world except Islam. That takes emancipation. When you look at the political correctness surrounding discussing the principles of Islam, you start to wonder, why Islam? If I were a Christian, I would be offended. I'm an atheist. I don't enjoy the same protection. So one step is, let's take Islam for what it is. It's a set of beliefs, and let's examine it. There are good things in there. There are things that are not so good but not so harmful, and there are terrible things in there. And all sorts of beliefs have that. Now, I understand the objection by many Muslims to say there are people who will use the criticism of Islam as an idea, as an excuse to hurt Muslim individuals, to discriminate against them, to abuse their rights or to violate their rights. And that's where the second step comes in. We have to protect the rights and freedoms of all individuals who live here, whether they are Muslim or not. By doing that, by protecting the Muslim individual, then we also take away from him the argument that Islam will only and can only be reformed, and Islamic tenets can be addressed only after we've given a guarantee that all people are protected. I would rather give the priority to victims like Amina and Sarah. Then the third step would be to protect the rights of people who think out aloud. I met a young man here tonight, and I get emails from Muslim individuals who say, I relate to you, I don't agree with everything you say, but there's so many things that I agree with, and I want to come out and say these things, and I want to come out and publish them, and I can't, because I don't want to live like you, I don't want to be threatened, and I don't want to run the risk of being killed. That sentiment, and it's growing, should make you all worried, because that is hollowing out the roots of the rule of law. If a society cannot protect its citizens, if a society cannot protect the freedom of expression, then that society is going to collapse. Then it's going to be like all the other societies where Muslim immigrants are running away from. So I would say start to treat Islam as a basically as any other idea, and protect the freedom of expression as we protect all in order to safeguard the public arena where we can have a debate. And finally, and that's what my statement was, my lecture was about tonight, women's rights. The emancipation of the Muslim woman is the key to reforming Islam.
Thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. I found them, as I imagine everyone did, both enlightening and challenging. My question for you would be, I think I understand better now why you feel that Islam is very incompatible with the values of the West.
Thank you.
What do you think of the concept of each jihad within Islam as a possible means of bridging those two things? The ability for Islam to critically reflect on both the hadith and the sunnah and those sorts of things. Thank you.
The concept of ijtihad, or, reason, applying reason to Islam, I think that's a great concept. And I have a dear friend and colleague who's engaged in that, who did not leave Islam, who considers herself a Muslim. Her name is Irshad Manji. And she has Project Ijtihad, where she's saying, okay, for us Muslims, we should start the reform from the inside. But just like me, she walks around with bodyguards. She's protected. She's not safe. So even the benign criticism from within, even those who do not want to leave the faith, are confronted with violence. And not just that, they are not protected by the large group of Muslims who should be able to say, well, I don't care whether you're doing it in the name of Allah or in the name of Quran. Don't use my religion to commit violence. What we see increasingly is an excited, maybe even overexcited group of Muslims who want to protect the image of Islam. Some of them will want to take to the streets, burn embassies, burn flags, when, according to their perception, the icons of Islam, like the cartoons of Muhammad, when that sort of thing happens, then they will organize themselves and go to the streets. They will not organize themselves when people are killed in the name of Muhammad, when verses are read out loudly from the Quran and people are killed, men kill their wives or their daughters or beat them up. And I think that's what when I say let's engage Muslims, that's what I mean. Let's engage in that. Let's talk about verse 4, chapter 4, verse 34 of the Quran. Let's talk about chapter 2, verse 222 of the Quran. Let's see how that's implemented. Stop running away from it. Come on. And stop distracting, stop changing the subject, and stop telling me over and over again Islam means peace. When in the name of Islam, almost all, if you look at two-thirds of all violence in the world is committed by Muslims against other Muslims or against non-Muslims in the name of Islam. And Muslims make up only 1/5 of the world population. Then you can't go on claiming that Islam is peace, please. I'm sorry, that's not an opinion, that's a fact. That's how we should engage and talk to Muslims.
Hi, is this on? Hi, my name is Asifa Qureshi. I'm faculty member at the law school here at the University of Wisconsin, so welcome as a faculty member to Wisconsin. I teach constitutional law and Islamic law, and it's actually with both of those hats that I welcome you here and that you're offering alternative ideas. It's my First Amendment support as a professor of constitutional law. It's also my affinity with the spirit of ikhtilaf and diversity in Islamic legal history that with both of those hats I welcome any alternative ideas for us to discuss. But it's with my constitutional law hat that I've been listening to you tonight, actually, interestingly enough. And your point about Islam being incompatible with liberal democracy, I've heard that many times. Interestingly enough, I've actually heard that more from Muslims, conservative Muslims, than I have from people like you. In fact, I remember conversations just as a grad student at Harvard doing my PhD where I debate this with people. But now I'm a professor of constitutional law where I teach 14th Amendment and separation of powers and all this, and I couldn't help but sort of replay what you're saying about Islam with my comparativist perspective. And it occurred to me that if I were to describe American constitutional law with 3 bullet points, for example, as you were picking bullet points out of Islamic law, and I said, American constitutional law says that a birth father of a child does not have the right to see his child if he's not married to the mother, and that those women who have their health threatened as a result of an abortion do not have the right, if their health is threatened, they still do not have the right to an abortion, and that it is unconstitutional for school districts to try to correct past racism as a result of civil rights discrimination in our history. If I were to say all of those things represent American constitutional law, I would actually be referencing actual cases, current law on the books that I just taught last semester in my 14th Amendment constitutional law class. Now, if you think that's an accurate description, in the audience here, if you think that's an accurate description of constitutional law, then I commend you for a really nice, concise description of Islamic law. But if you all think that that's not really quite the whole picture, then I advise all of us to take a pause and think that maybe there's a little bit more to this story than we've heard tonight, and we've only just heard one slice, and I encourage you all to continue to learn about that just like you would take a constitutional law class if you want to know more about the Constitution. Thank you very much.
There is more to this story than meets the eye. I have followed debates on abortion, the rights of gay people to marry, euthanasia, and healthcare. And you know what I see? When the American Constitution is enacted, I see people whose opinions are sharply different oppose one another and debate with one another. And except for one crazy man or two crazy people on the abortion side, there are no threats that I know of. And if there are threats, those people who are threatened are protected by American law. What I also see is that those who resort to violence are compelled and expelled by their own groups, whether they're on the left or on the right. Now let's take a country that implements Islam, the Quran, and Islam as its constitution, and Islamic law or Sharia, Saudi Arabia. Do you think, in all honesty, that you could have a debate, an honest debate as we have in the United States, on gay marriages, abortion, women's rights in Saudi Arabia and get away with it? The most successful ethnic cleansing of all time has taken place in the one place in the world where Sharia is implemented, and that's the ethnic cleansing of Jews. Take another place where Sharia is implemented, Iran, where the president comes and proudly tells us that there are no gay people, where women are forced to veil themselves. It is in the Quran that a man should have sex with his wife whether she likes it or not. In the United States, that's marital rape. In Saudi Arabia, in Iran, everywhere in the world where Sharia is implemented, that's legal. It's true, there's another side to this story. Do these constitutions differ or not? I'm not making it up. It's empirical reality. And as a professor of constitutional history and constitutional law, I think you would make a huge difference if you were to highlight these differences so that Muslims living in the United States could appreciate American Constitution and maybe, as enlightened individuals, share these values with their fellow Muslims, whether it's in America or outside of America.
In the interest of time and judging by the amount of questions that we have, we're going to try and keep our answers very, very brief. And while we certainly appreciate your comment, Ms. Ali, if you could also keep it brief, that would be great. Thank you.
I just got riled up there.
Yes. In the interest of time, thank you.
All right. Ms. Ali, I am a citizen of an Islamic country. I'm very fearful to hear you say that a country that that practices Islam as its constitution or its main focus is going to collapse soon or might collapse. And I am resounding with this when I hear back home that places of worship are being threatened and attacked. So as a law-abiding citizen, what advice would you give to me? Because as a non-Muslim, I am not well accepted to engage in open debate. I might be threatened. So what do you think about this?
If you have time to blog, and you can do that anonymously, you could set up lots and lots of blogs talking about the country where you come from, what is going wrong, and invite Muslims to come and debate with you. The problem is, right now, it's only radical Muslims who are setting up study centers and madrasas and blogs, etc., etc. And we're not meeting that kind of activism. And I think we need counter-activism, and the new technology, the age of information that we live in, gives us the opportunity to confront them without having to sacrifice our lives.
Thing is, right now, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You mentioned that Islam has not seen a large change since it was first created as a religion. And you didn't see the secularization, the church and state separation that we at least saw in Christianity. Now, the way we got that in Christianity was a lot of religious wars, 30 Years' War, a long series of conflicts that eventually led people to realize that that the religions weren't worth fighting over. Now, in countries like Iraq recently, we've seen increasingly secular governments, increasingly secular parties taking over religious parties due to constant secular conflict, which eventually got Iraqis into a similar state of mind. Now, what do you think of the concept of war and violence and those effects on secularization in a society?
Well, the only way to curb violence in society is by applying the rule of law. And many Muslim countries either have despots or corrupt governments. And the opposition, largest oppositions in Muslim countries, want to bring about states that are based on Sharia law. Now, that promises also more violence. So the answer is, if you say it took Christians many years and a lot of bloodshed, we have had in Islam a lot of bloodshed, and Islam exists for 1400 years, and I think this is the 21st century is the opportunity to have Muslim minds and Muslim individuals be confronted with alternative ideas that are successful. See, that's what I want to underscore. It's no longer a theory that political freedom and economic freedom is better than divine law. It is practice. We see it in almost all countries. It's not perfect, but it's better than where Sharia law is implemented. And I hope that Muslims can benefit from that and can learn from that. I hope that institutions like this one will educate young minds, young Muslim minds as the future leaders, to distinguish good ideas from bad ideas, even if those ideas were given in with the breast milk. Maybe that was too short.
Ms. Hirsi Ali, thank you for speaking. I'm Jason from Political Science here. You said something fascinating very early in your speech. You spoke about how when you were in Germany deciding whether to go to Canada or flee to the Netherlands, that there was sort of a good and a bad voice or angel on your shoulder. And you said the voice of sin won. That really struck me because I'm a confessing Christian who really believes in the power of sin. And I'm curious about your own beliefs, because you're such a cogent and forceful speaker for moral law, which I tremendously commend you for. Not condemn, pardon.
Thank you.
And I'm curious, would you say now that I'm an atheist, I rejected the idea of sin, or would you say that the moral law is still connected to right religious conduct in a certain way? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. the way I get this question many times, and the way I answer it is there are people who believe that God created man, and there are people who believe that man created God. And I have no doubt that the God you believe in and the concept of God that you adhere to is probably wonderful. And I will continue to believe that until, in the name of your God, you start to argue that other people's freedoms can be infringed upon or impose your beliefs on other people. Personally, it works for me that God created man, and having emancipated myself from him or her or it just so shortly, I'm not keen to go back into the ideas of sin, because that is too absolute. I want to know, when something is wrong, what is wrong with it? Why is it wrong? What is the context, etc.? And the emancipation from religion has given me the opportunity, without fear of an hereafter or without fear from co-religionists, to ask these questions, to seek answers, and that's the idea that I defend. Thank you.
I would just like to get a very quick gauge. We have very long lines on either side. We've tried to gender diversify those lines in the name of equality here. Given answers of roughly 1 to 2 minutes, how many more questions do you feel comfortable taking tonight, Ms. Hirsi Ali?
That's putting me on the spot. Well, we started an hour later, and I'll take 3 from here and 3 from there.
Okay, so 6 more questions.
Yeah,
okay.
Please keep them short.
Hi, my name is Mohammed, and I am a fellow countryman, and I'm a fellow countryman, and I come from the same town you're from, and all the things that you said, I don't agree with you, but I disagree with you. That doesn't mean I threaten you or I say something bad to you. You can have your own belief. I can have my own belief. Earlier, you say that Islam is violent and everything, and I was born to Mother Islam, and my father is a Muslim, and I still practice after living this country like 11 years. My faith, my family is all Muslim. My question to you, how would people believe you that when you lie, when you were in Dutch country, your immigration status, and they kick you out of the country, and how would all these people believe you? What you said is true. Were you telling then true, or were you telling the truth right now? When would you lie? And my second fault to you is, you said Muhammad was a prophet of violence. His own uncle wasn't Muslim, and he wasn't violent. He didn't kill. His own people that surrounded them was a Jewish. And my question to you, why would you all point to everything that violent in Muslim? And people that World War II wasn't Muslim. Pearl Harbor wasn't Muslim. You know, Normandy wasn't Muslim. You know, all those things that happened, people did it. Christianity, Catholic, Orthodox, everybody kill each other. Mm-hmm. And let me point to you. There's a verse in the Quran said, وَمَنْ أَحْيَا النَّاسَ فَكَأَنَّمَا أَحْيَا النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا وَمَنْ قَتَلَ النَّاسَ فَكَأَنَّمَا قَتَلَ النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا. When you kill somebody, like you kill entire global. And when you save somebody, like you save entire people. So I'm telling all these audience, the Quran is not violent teaching. I memorized Quran when I was kids. So my question to you.
Hang on. Could you take 10 more seconds?
Yeah. My question to you, like, how would I believe you right now, or would I believe you when you were lying your immigration status?
Okay, perfect. So you're done.
When I came to the Netherlands and I asked for asylum, I lied. I pretended I came from Somalia. I didn't tell them about the fact that I was escaping an arranged/forced marriage. That's well known. But I'm not here to dispute that. And in answer to the first question, the first thing that comes to my mind is, let's assume that I am a liar, that I'm an evil person. Let's assume that I'm traumatized and that I need a scapegoat for all the terrible things I experienced or didn't experience in my life. Still, Muslims will have to contend with the fact that 2/3 of all violence in the world are committed by Muslims against Muslims or Muslims against non-Muslims. We have to contend with the reality that one of the 2 countries where Islamic law is implemented is developing a nuclear bomb ready to use, and that we are facing a global crisis of peace and war. Let's, as those of us born into a Muslim, face the fact that thieves in any place, people who are suspected of being thieves, hands are amputated, as is done by the Shabab in Somalia, parts of Nigeria, Afghanistan, parts of Iraq. Let's contend with the concept of martyrdom or suicide killings. Let's contend with the current anti-Semitic trend that is now spread in the name of Islam. Even if I were the most evil person in the world, even if I didn't exist, these realities exist, and Muslims have to face them. To your second question, which is tied to the first question, the people who commit these atrocities cite the Prophet Muhammad. When I talked to men who wanted to bring down the age of marriage from 18 in the Netherlands to 15, and I told them, you can't do that. In this country, this is considered to be against the law. They argued, but it's the Prophet Muhammad who took a 9-year-old to be his wife. And you look at a country like Iran or like Saudi Arabia or Yemen or any of the places where Sharia as family law is implemented, there is an epidemic of child brides. And in fact, taking child brides is still today justified in the name of Muhammad. Jihad. Muhammad is the example. He's the one who conquered Medina, he conquered Persia, he conquered and conquered and conquered and expanded Islam. And those who followed him after his death did the same. And they did it because Muhammad gave the example. And so it is the fact that you have an icon who on the one hand cannot be judged, cannot be questioned, and on the other hand justified all these violations of human rights. And I want you to look at what Muhammad said and examine him, not my mental state and whether I lie or not, because that really doesn't make a difference.
In your book, The Caged Virgin, you talk about how the enforcement of virginity is used as a tool to oppress women in Muslim communities around the world, in Africa and the Netherlands, which you talk about specifically. And I was wondering if you could talk about sexual freedom as an important part of women's rights.
Thank you. Well, sexual freedom... Sorry. The student wants to know if I could talk about sexual freedom as a basic right, and I wanted to say I completely agree with the fact that not only sexual freedom for women, but sexual freedom for all humans is a basic right, and it's denied more to women than it is denied to men, but it's also denied to men in the name of Islam.
First, I wanted to say thank you for coming here because all my life as a Muslim woman, I have struggled with the same thing that you have. And because I have disagreed with some of these beliefs, I have also been looked down upon as an infidel. But you talk about the U.S. providing religious freedoms, and I just want to let you know that not too long ago, there was a Jewish man who was on a plane, and he wanted to pray before the plane took off, and the airplane hostess did not recognize his ritual and thought he was a terrorist and took him off the plane. And I don't consider that to be religious freedom in the U.S. I have two short questions, though. Although I agree, I have also struggled with changing the stereotypes of Islam and Muslim men and women in the U.S. because there is a profound amount of ignorance that's going on, especially because of the terrorism that's occurring. But I also want to know that in a time where Islam is repudiated, do you think that speaking out so adamantly against it is wise?
Thank you for your question. I think, again, that we have to make a distinction between Islam and Muslims. Muslim individuals, like you've all shown tonight, you come from different places and you either practice the religion, used to practice the religion, don't practice it anymore, or try or aspire to practice it as purely as you possibly can. So Muslims are diverse. Islamic doctrine as a concrete, comprehensive set of beliefs, that's what I'm after. Because people, see, look, ideas and beliefs, when they are valued, people practice them. But not only that, they pass them on to their children. They pass them on to their community. The idea spreads. And when you have a large enough group of people practicing a bad or trying to practice a bad idea, the consequences can be terrible, as we know from other. I'm not stating that only Islam or Islamic beliefs are bad ideas. Humanity is full of them. Islam is the only set of beliefs in the West that is exempted from the same scrutiny that we give to other ideas. So my whole point tonight is, let's embark on that. Let's scrutinize. Why can we talk about Karl Marx and read him and list down the good things that he said and the terrible consequences of his idea, and refrain from mentioning Muhammad? Well, there are 1.57 billion people who say they follow Muhammad's creed. I would say that's an urgent, and important task to embark on, to examine Muhammad's ideas. If people keep saying that, then I want to know, what is it about? And the Quran is not a big book. The Hadith, the volumes are not that big. They're easy, they're accessible, and these days they're in English and other languages. So you can't debate with Muslims the idea that it only came from, you needed cultural anthropologists and cultural attachés in the State Department to explain and interpret Islam to you is no longer the case. You can now talk to fellow Muslims because they're Muslims living here. You can go to Muslim countries and you can read Islamic scripture and have a proper debate with Muslims about Islam.
I admire your braveness and being outspoken about the criticism regarding Islam rules. If your goal was to make a strong feeling in the audience against Islam and Muslims, and a Muslim to be ashamed of his religion, you have been very successful, I believe. That's along with the media, Western media. But if you wanted to give a good picture of Islam, what you said was mostly applied to a portion of Islam, kind of one sort of interpretation of Islam, which is more fundamentalism. Going back to the country that you talked a lot about, the example of state Sharia, which when religion gets to the power, it's only a tool. It's not a good way to look at, to know Sharia when it is in power and wants to keep the power with any means. But going back to Iran that you mentioned, there are many reformists there, Islamic reformists and imams, that I invite you to read about them to have a different picture of that. I invite you to read the books of Dr. Soroush, who is a well-known philosopher, the late Ayatollah Montazeri, and the other Ayatollahs there who are reformists, and because of having a different picture and equality between men and women, they have been under great pressure from the state religion. Mm-hmm. But that's another side of the story that unless you mention that, I won't call your picture unbiased.
I'm assuming this is the last question? No, there's one. Okay. So I'll be even quicker. I have read Soroush. I have read Abu Zaid. The question is, there are so many people, for instance, in Iran, theologians who are looking for new interpretations and who see a hope in reforming Islam. I've read Surosh, I've read Abu Zaid, and the idea that they want to promote, and it's not only them, there are many people who are doing that, that Islam was misinterpreted. I find it noble, and I think it's a good exercise, but I don't find it convincing. And I don't find it convincing because, you know, if I write a paper or an article and I'm doing it in my fourth language, and I'm misunderstood and misinterpreted by one or two people, I can shrug my shoulders over that. But if I'm misunderstood by millions of people, and you are God, and you're omniscient and powerful, then I start to wonder, maybe God, Allah, the Quran is not misunderstood. And when I read the Quran and the Hadith, I find them to be explicit. And I think that the next step in the process of reforming Islam is to emancipate oneself from the idea that reformation can only be found in Islamic scripture. I think that the Muslim mind can be opened also, probably more importantly, by looking outside of Islam and then retaining of Islam those things that people still consider to be valuable, like hospitality, generosity, and maybe spiritual meaning, like Sufism. But the political and social dimensions of Islam are better discarded. I don't think gazing at the Quran for hours and hours and hours is going to help that.
Okay, we've had a request here for a question asked by two people at once. I'm going to allow this very, very conditionally. I'm giving you a minute and a half. We're looking for questions here and not statements, of course. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to lead with a short background as to why we're asked this question. Not really a statement. Basically, I guess part of the premise of your speech today was that the United States and the West was a secular, less violent part of the world, I guess. I remember reading recently that the former president of these United States called the war in Iraq, I guess a holy war in a way to put it, said that we were fighting the enemies called Gog and Magog, and said this to the president of France.
And let's just connect that with your idea. I teach and learn here at UW-Madison, and so your notion, this fundamental notion that keeps running through your talk, is the difference between Muslims and Islam, the ideas and the consequences. I don't find that convincing, and if I did, then I would have to pose the question my friend here is alluding to, which is, what are the political consequences of what you're saying, given that social amnesia, is it, we have just gone through a war in Iraq, an illegal, a rule of law, is that the rule of law? We actually, just one second, when weapons of destruction, weapons of mass destruction, when that fell through, you know what was the reason? Do you guys remember? The question is, when the US government under George W. Bush said, we are going to liberate the women of Iraq, and that seemed convincing to the US public, how did you feel? And then when the same argument was applied to the war on Afghanistan, how did you feel? This was my question.
When President Bush went to Iraq, I observed the reaction of Americans, the opposition to the war, and how passionate it was, leading to a general election and the next president saying, we shouldn't have done this. When the United States was attacked on the 11th of September 2001, we saw celebrations on Muslim streets. We saw celebrations by Muslims. I was in the Netherlands, and there were a group of young men who ran out and cheered and celebrated. Let me finish. Afghanistan. My personal opinion, after those attacks, if I were in the White House and I looked at the number of people who attacked, and they were all from Saudi Arabia, and it was done in the name of Islam, and Saudi Arabia is the center of Islam, then my logical idea would have been not Afghanistan, but Saudi Arabia. The choice was made, and Afghanistan was attacked because those people who planned the attack were in Afghanistan. And I'm not here to defend American foreign policy. I'm not saying it is perfect. I'm here to say, for all its shortcomings, America has this power that when individuals have a bad idea, and that bad idea takes a hold of people, those ideas are examined, and because they're examined and criticized and debated, they can be reversed. I think it's wearisome, it's getting tedious now, that Muslims keep pointing to external powers, keep pointing their finger to things outside of them. Okay, instead of talking about what Muslims are doing in the name of Islam to their women, we say, no, look, the Christians used to do it, the Jews are doing it. When we address the concept of jihad, and in the name of jihad, more Muslims are killed than non-Muslims, instead of addressing that, we say, oh, look, America went to war too. So you always have this excuse, let's change the subject. Let's talk about, so what, if America kills people, are you saying you have the right to kill people? When will we ever get to talk about ourselves, take responsibility for what we believe in and how we practice it? And I hope that that is in the exchange. I learned a lot from you tonight. Thank you for having me. But I hope if you ask me what message are you leaving, it is that. Let's ask ourselves, what are we doing wrong?